Hi everyone, my name is Shota, and today I would like to present a thorough guide of CSS naming convention, BEM. So before I jump into the presentation, let me quickly talk about myself. I am Shota. Hi. I had worked as a front-end developer for a few years, and during my time at the previous company, I developed my passion into CSS. But CSS can be very tricky, especially for somebody who just started out. So that's why I decided to pick up this topic for my presentation. So what is BEM? If you've never heard of the word BEM, you're probably asking this question, what is BEM? But before that, let me quickly talk about what a CSS naming convention is. So CSS naming convention it's just a set of rules for naming CSS selectors. If you're not familiar with the word CSS selectors, it's just a label used in CSS to apply styles to the specific HTML element. And CSS naming convention is just a set of rules for naming CSS selectors. It's very simple. But why do we need such a thing? Let me explain this in the next slide. So by default, CSS is not that strict. And what I mean by that is there are not many rules or instructions out there about how you should write CSS. So you can build or design your CSS whatever the way you like. So let's say you might want to apply styles directly to the HTML tag, or you could give it a class selector and apply styles to it. Or you could even use ID selector, or maybe you might want to use a little more complex class selector, just like this. So you can do basically whatever you want with CSS. But imagine a situation like this. So let's say you're building this beautiful card-looking components, and nothing is too complicated here. What you did is basically you gave this card a name books, and here the heading is called a title, and the paragraph is called a text. So nothing is too complicated. But then next day, your boss came around and said, okay, so we need a green card too, and let's make the heading white for this one. But still no square, because what you have to do is you can simply add another class selector to the box and title. So you add another class selector called a BG green to the box and color white to the title, and now your boss is happy. But then next day, your boss came around again and said, okay, so we need an orange card too, and let's put underline right beneath the heading for this one. And now you see things are getting a bit messy, especially if you look at the class selector we have for the heading. Selectors are getting a bit too long, and it's hard to tell what kind of styles apply to it. By the way, this is something that actually happened to me at my previous workplace, and this is exactly why we need CSS naming conventions. Building your CSS with following certain rules gives itself a better readability and maintainability, and ultimately it prevents your CSS from becoming a big cluttered mess, just like we saw. So that's why we need CSS naming conventions. And now we're back to our first question. So what is BEM? BEM is one of those CSS naming conventions. It's developed by the team at Yandex back in 2005, and now it's one of the most popular CSS techniques out there. And lastly, but most importantly, BEM breaks a website into 3 components. And what does it mean by that? Well, it means a website is composed of these 3 following components, and BEM names class selector based on these categories. So let's check them out. So here we go. We have block, element, and modifier, and these are the 3 building blocks of BEM. But what are they? So before we actually see the exact definition of each of those, let's think this way. So now you're building this clock, and of course this clock is composed of many parts, such as hour hand, hour, minute. So here, what is block, and what is element, and what is modifier? So let's say, can hour hand be a block, or can minute hand be a block, or hour or minute, can they be a block? The answer is no. So imagine what happens if we take these hour hand, minute hand, and hour minute out of the clock. Would they still mean anything to this clock? No, they would lose their meaning. Once we take them out of this clock, they wouldn't mean anything. So hour hand and minute hand becomes just a bar, and same goes for the hour and minute. they don't mean anything, and it just becomes a random number. So this means they are dependent on this block. This is what BEM calls element, and what they are dependent on, here in this case, it's clock. This is what BEM is called block. So here in this case, block is clock, and element is hour hand, hour, minute. And one last thing we have here is modifier. So what is modifier? And you may have noticed some of hours we have here, 12, 3, 6, 9, they are styled with a different color. And this is something modifier can represent, as modifier represents components appearance looking. So here modifier is color of hours. And we're going to see the exact definition of each of these block element modifier. But this analogy is going to help you understand them better. Right. So first of all, we've got block. Block is a functionally independent page component that can be reused. In HTML, blocks are represented by the class attribute. And the block name describes its purpose, not its state. So purpose means what that component is, such as menu or button. And on the other hand, the state is anything related to the component's appearance, such as red or big. So what does block actually look like? Back in our previous example, we had this component called a card. And all we know right now is block is something independent and reusable. And it's also supposed to represent its purpose. So with that information, we can probably define this entire component as block and call it a card. And next we have element. Element is a composite part of a block that can be used separately from it. So element is something specific to the block. And the element name describes its purpose, not its state. So just like block, element also represents its purpose. But here purpose means something more like its role within that block. So what does element look like? Now we know the definition of element, and element is something within that block, and it represents its role within that block. So with that, forming that definition, we can probably treat both of these heading and a paragraph as elements, because heading here works as a title for this card, and paragraph is just a text for this card component. And one thing to note here is element name is separated from block name by double underscore, and this is BEM syntax. This is how BEM separates an element from a block. So back in HTML, this heading would get a class name of something like card underscore title. And this paragraph would get something like card underscore text. And lastly, we have modifier. Modifier is an entity that defines the appearance, state, or behavior of a block or element. The modifier name describes its appearance, state, or behavior. So by appearance, that means is it big or is it small, or what color that is. Anything related to the component's appearance can be represented by the modifier and status word. So what does modifier look like? Just like an element, BEM uses another syntax to separate it from the others. So for modifier, we have to separate it from block element by using double hyphen. So back in our previous example, we had this green card. And this green background color is exact definition, or it is the appearance or looking of this component. So that has to be treated as a modifier. And then same goes for the white font color for the heading as well. So in HTML, this card, green card, would get another class selector that is called card -bg green. And the heading would get another class selector called card __ title -fcy. So these are three building blocks of BEM. So now let's put BEM into practice. And from now on, I'm going to give a quick demo. And in the demo, I'm going to create a mock version of this beautiful looking website by Soaply. And I will style it with BEM to explain further on how to name class selectors with BEM and how to break a page into block, element, and modifier. But before we begin the demo, let's roughly break a page down into block, element, and modifier. So I'm just going to start with the block. So now we see this website, And right off the bat, you can tell this website is composed of two major sections. So first of all, we have this hero, or you may call it main visual section. And then the other one we have is this section where we explain about our product concept. So we have hero and concept sections. And they're a good place to start with, and I probably treat them as both of them as book, because they are the two independent block of this independent section of this website. And now take a look at these buttons. So we have these two buttons, and they have slight difference in style, but the structure is identical. And most importantly, both of them exist in totally different block, which means they're not dependent on the block. That tells us we also have to treat these buttons as block. And next we have elements. So first of all, there's this heading for the main visual section, and I would treat it as an element because this heading works as a title or heading for this main visual section, and same goes for the heading and the paragraph for the concept section. And lastly, modifier. So as I mentioned briefly, these buttons have slight difference in color, especially they have different background color. And this is something modifier can represent. So I will set up modifier for the button color. Right. So let's jump into the demo. So here we go. We have on the left-hand side, we have the VS Code. We have VS Code open up. And on the right-hand side, we have the browser, which is the visual representation of this HTML. And yeah, we have demo.html inside the VS Code. And let me quickly run through the basic structure of this HTML. So we have two major sections, if you remember. We have, first of all, we have main visual, and another one we have is concept. And inside of this concept section, we have three article tags. If we scroll down a little bit, yes, we have three articles here, and they represent card components within that concept section. And we have this div right above the first article tag, and this div is basically wrapping these cards around, and this is what this div does. And we have demo.css, and in there we have a whole bunch of styles, which I prepared already so that we don't have to spend too much time what kind of styles we need. So yeah, we can use these styles, and we can actually start giving class selectors for the HTML tag. So I want to start off with the block. So first of all, let's start with the main visual. So we have here section, and this represents main visual. So let's call it main visual. Right. And another block we have is section. So let's call this entire section concept. And another block we had is bottom. So let's go back inside the main visual and let's call this BTM bottom. And at the very bottom, we have another bottom. Let's call it BTN bottom. And let's see what happens if we apply styles to these selectors. So here we have styles for main visual. So we could uncomment this. Right. And we have styles for section as well. Here we go. We have our sections. So let's get this comment back in. Okay. And one last thing we have to do is we have comment styles for this bottom as well. So if you see the browser, some of the styles we had already started kicking in, and it looks much better than before. So we should keep doing this for the element as well. And next, the thing we want to do is we want to give class selectors to the element of main visual so that we can apply style to them. So let's go back to the demo.html and let's start giving selectors for this HTML tag. So inside of this main visual, we have this div and h1. And this h1 basically is a heading or title for this main visual. So we can probably call it main visual __ heading. Right. And we have this div right above the h1 tag. And it is basically wrapping these h1 and bottom. So we can probably call it main visual __ wrapper, because it does wrap these components around. So let's go back to the demo.css and apply some styles to it. So here we have styles for wrapper, and we have another styles for heading as well. So let's see what happens. And boom, yes, if you look at the browser, main view section is done. So now we can move on to the concept section as well. So we have concept section, and if you remember, we have 3 cards and heading and paragraph. So let's give them a class selector so we can apply style to them. Back in the demo.html, we have this h1 and paragraph tag, p tag. So yeah, let's call this h2 a heading of this concept. So concept __ heading. Right. So paragraph we have, this is a description of this concept. So let's call it concept __ description. So let's see what happens if we apply style to them. Back in the demo.css, we have styles already for these components. So let's see what happens if we get this comment back in, and yep. So yeah, you can see heading and description is correctly styled. So now we can do this for the Cardo component as well. So we had 3 articles which represents each of the Cardo component. So we can probably start there. And this article is basically a card. So we can probably call it concept __ card. There we go. And once we have done that, we can copy this class selector and paste it for the other article tag as well. So let's copy this and paste it for the other 2 as well. Here we go. Right. And now we can apply styles to this card component. So we have some styles for it. So here we have width 30% and see what happens. Okay, so yeah, we can see styles are correctly applied to the components. And we can do the rest of it same like this card. So back in the demo.html, we have this figure and h3 and a paragraph tag as well. And this figure tag is basically an image of this concept. So let's call it card concept, card image. And let's copy this class selector and paste it for the rest of the figure tag as well. Right. And we can do the same for h3. And this is basically heading for this card components. So we can probably call it concept __ card. And let's call it heading. And we can do the same as the figure tag and the article. We can copy this class selector and paste it for the other heading as well. So yeah. And now we have this paragraph tag. And this paragraph tag is basically a description for this card. So let's call it concept __ card description. Once we've done that, we can copy that and paste it for the rest of the paragraph tag as well, p tag as well. Right. So let's copy that and let's paste it for the rest of the p tag. Okay, cool. So back in the demo.css, we have some styles already. So let's get them back in. Right. Okay, so let's see what happens. Yes, Cardo components started looking much better. But one last thing we want to do here is we want to align them horizontally. And if you remember, we had this div which wraps this Cardo components around. So we can probably apply some styles to it. But before that, we have to give class selector for this div. So what it does is just basically wraps these cards around. So we can probably call it concept __ card wrapper. So let's call it concept. Here we go. __ card wrapper. Right, sweet. So once we have done that, let's apply styles to it. So here we go. Let's uncomment this. And boom. If you look at the browser, concept section is almost done. One last thing we want to do is, remember, if we had at this bottom, at the very bottom of this website, and it had a different background color for the first one, from the first one. So let's set up modifier for this one. So back in the demo.html, at the very bottom of this HTML file, we have this button component. So we can go there and give it a modifier. So let's go back to demo.html Here we go. So let's call it BTM --red. So remember, modifier is separated from block or element name by double hyphen. So let's put double hyphen and call it red. Here we go, and we have styles for that. Right, let's uncomment this. And here we go. The page is complete. So this is how you implement BEM into your CSS. Right, that's it for the demo. And let's go back to the presentation. Right, so now we've just seen how to implement BEM into CSS. And all those CSS naming conventions are there to help you build more robust CSS. But does it make your CSS perfect? Is BEM actually perfect? I think you can guess an answer for this, but unfortunately, no. BEM has some shortcomings. And what are they? So now we know what BEM is and how BEM works. So by now you can probably tell the class selector gets really, really long with BEM. Since we connect element and modifier name with its parent or block name, selector name tend to get really long with BEM, and that's the biggest downside of BEM. And also, it probably requires a lot of reading and practice before you actually apply them into your project. So we can say learning cost is probably high. But it's not over yet. Don't worry. We've got something to help you overcome these shortcomings. And now it's time for me to introduce the mighty, syntactically awesome style sheet, so-called SAS. So what is SAS? SAS is an extension to CSS, which stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheet. But SAS lets you use some features that don't even exist in normal CSS, such as variables, imports, built-in functions, nestings. And this nesting feature makes such a strong combo with BEM. So why is SAS so powerful? So here we have on the left-hand side, we have the normal CSS without using SAS. And at the moment, it doesn't look too bad because the scale of it is very small. But you can tell there are a lot of things going on, especially around the modifier. The selector name is getting a bit too long. And on the right-hand side, we have this SAS CSS. And immediately you can tell the difference. It has very unique structure. At the top level, we have this block called a card. And any element and modifier that comes inside of this, that belongs to that block comes inside of this block. So just like this. And here in this case, we have modifier for this title, for this element called a title. So this modifier is actually defined within inside of this element called a title, like this. So this is what nesting feature of SAS is all about. But this is not the only unique thing about the SAS. And you may have noticed already, there's an ampersand at the beginning of this element name and modifier name. And without SAS, we would have to write element and modifier name without omitting any part. Otherwise, CSS wouldn't recognize and won't work. But with SAS, we can simply replace this block name with the ampersand. And this feature massively helps us to reduce the amount of code we have to write. Yeah, so I won't go any deeper with SAS for this presentation, but if you are thinking of using BEM, I would strongly recommend you do so with SAS. So that's it for the presentation. Thank you for listening. And yeah, there's been a lot of information, so don't worry if you don't get them all at once. But SAS is such a popular technique of CSS, so you will find a lot of resources out there which helps you to get started with SAS, BEM and SAS. But if there's one thing you can take away from this presentation, I think it will be like this. BEM is mind-bending. I really hope it was for you. So yeah, that's it for my presentation. Thank you for listening. I left QR code, which to the GitHub repo, and where you can check out all the material for the demo. So if you're interested, please check it out. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.